Well, hello, church history friends, and welcome to our final lecture in this lecture series. My name is Barb Walden, and I am excited to share today's program with Christin Mackay as we sit back and hear about the 100-year history of the Auditorium in Independence, Missouri. This historic dome has been the home to many significant events and conference legislation throughout Community of Christ history, and I hope you're as excited as we are to hear those historic details tonight. Now, today's lecture is the last in a four-part lecture series. All of these programs were recorded and are available on our YouTube channel and website in case you happen to have missed one of those lectures. Wendy will drop a link in the chat that will lead you to our full catalog of past lectures where you'll find videos dating all the way back to the summer of 2020. Our annual campaign for funding the Alma Blair internship program is continuing throughout the month of May. Gift matching is still going strong as our board of directors is offering a $17,000 matching gift. That's right, donations you give this evening will be doubled up to $17,000 for the campaign. That's amazing. As you can see on the screen, there are a number of ways that you can give to support the Alma Blair internship program, whether in an online donation or by mail. I like to think that when you give to the Alma Blair program, you are making an investment in future leaders, future historians, future curators, future storytellers. So thank you for your consideration and for helping preserve both Alma Blair's enduring legacy and church heritage through your support for this campaign. We greatly appreciate it. Now, helping me behind the scenes is Peter Smith and Wendy Eaton. Peter is a board member for the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation and co-host of our annual church history tours, while Wendy serves as our administrative assistant here at the Historic Sites Foundation and co-hosts the Cup of Joe series on Faith Unfiltered podcast. Thank you both for helping out behind the scenes. Our guest storyteller this evening is none other than Christin Mackay, a familiar face here at the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation, where she serves as a member of the board of directors. Christin is a past president of the John Whitmer Historical Association, and she currently serves on the Community of Christ Church History and Sacred Story team. Her lecture this evening is titled The Auditorium Groundbreaking Centennial. So welcome, Christin. We are so excited that you're here, and I'm going to turn the spotlight over to you because we're ready to hear all the tales you have to tell about the auditorium.
Thanks, Barb. I'm happy to be here this evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm excited to share with you over 50 photos of the auditorium from the last 100 years. Some of you may have seen them before, or perhaps were even in the building when they were taken. All of the images are courtesy of Community of Christ Archives unless otherwise captioned. On our first image, what you see is a colorized version of the initial plan for the auditorium. But let's start back at the beginning, back more than 100 years ago in 1917. The idea of a building that would be large enough to hold general conferences was presented by President Frederick M. Smith at the 1917 General Conference. Here you see Fred in 1920. I like to think that he's sitting there imagining the auditorium. The Conference of 1920 approved the construction of the auditorium, and Henry C. Smith was called as church architect, with the job to design the auditorium, independent sanitarium, and eventually buildings at Graceland University. On this slide, we have an excerpt from Recommendations of the Presidency. With scarcely a dissenting vote or uttered objection, the following recommendations were adopted by the Conference Assembly April 10, 1920, and was published in the Saints Herald on April 21st. From the article, and this perhaps leads very logically to the next recommendation that the presidency desires to make on a matter which we have to present to you, and that is the question of a building program. You will remember last year in our presentation to the conference, some of the things for which we expected to stand. We spoke of a building program. Too long has this church delayed in having formulated a well-developed building program. Perhaps I can say without any disrespect to those who have held responsible positions in the church in the past in the line of construction that we have not today in the church one building that is adequate for the purposes for which it was intended. Not one. This building program, therefore, should include not only such things as a general office building and assembly hall, but it ought to include a well-defined building plan, such as perhaps exists in a most beautiful form of imagery in the mind of our splendid young architect. A plan of a system of buildings which will meet every social need for us as an organization. A community of buildings, if you please. And we cannot possibly outline, conceive, or imagine a building program that will touch the center place, but what we find will carry its ramifications farther than its environs into the Kansas City stake on the west, Holden stake in several directions, far west on the north, and even the Lamoni stake. For this is the organized form of the regions roundabout, and the building needs of these themselves in their general aspects must be taken into consideration when we are outlining this building program. Fred goes on to say, and I suspect under the direction of our church architect, it will not be difficult to form a commission of consecrated men who will study the building needs of the center place and the regions roundabout. We can bring to us a well-definitized plan towards which we can work and know that every brick that goes into place is going into place according to a plan worked out in all its details from the first and working towards a definite goal. This building plan I should like to see initiated, and it must be formulated. The period between 1919 and 1926 had been one of contention in the church. Fred M. had an ambitious social program agenda, the Sanitarium Hospital, the Children's Home, and the Auditorium, that clashed with the more fiscally conservative bishopric and other church quorums. In 1921, the church implemented an austerity program that included the release of nearly 70 missionaries. At the 1922 General Conference, 6 new apostles were ordained, bringing a new outlook and energy to the quorum. In 1924, President Smith presented a new document to the Standing High Council that outlined his proposal on church governance. Commonly known as Supreme Directional Control, Fred had hoped to consolidate administrative authority into the First Presidency, which would also allow for his building program to proceed without delay. Doctrine and Covenants section 135, verse 1, released the presiding bishopric and allowed for the First Presidency to assume more broad controls over church finances. At the time, the cost of construction for the auditorium was expected to be around $882,000. With a portion of the funds in hand, the construction company of Earl Moore and Lyle Weeks were contracted to begin the clearing of the land, and W.O. Hands served as the surveyor. The groundbreaking took place on February 1, 1926. Here we have some images of the ground being broken by horse and wagon with some power machinery in the background. By February 8th, the grading and excavating work was moving at a rate of 1,000 cubic yards of dirt per day. The construction firm used power machinery, which would prove more economical than using hand plows and scrapers, or wagons loaded by hand using shovels. The power tractors would load the dirt onto 15 horse-drawn wagons to be carried away. The Saints Herald reported, "The citizens of Independence are glad to see this work started. The saints in Independence are not only glad to see this start made, but happy in the consciousness that the church is fulfilling its promise made to the membership when they subscribed their money for this purpose." Here we have a photo of the groundbreaking ceremony. You can see Fred M. is third from the right, and we have F. Henry Edwards second from the left there. The first concrete footing was poured along the south wall on Monday, May 24th, 1926. A ceremony to mark the occasion was held with church leaders and a small group of people, including local press. A copper box of the heaviest sheet copper obtainable had been made for the occasion. It was 16 inches long by 12 inches wide and 10 inches deep. In this box were placed 21 items, including the 3 standard books of Scripture, the first 4 volumes of church history, current issues of the Saints Herald and Zion's Ensign, a missionary paper, the April and May issues of the Autumn Leaves, which was a youth periodical, the 1926 Acacia, the May 22nd issues of the Independence Examiner, Kansas City Times, Kansas City Journal, and President Frederick M. Smith's address to the 1926 General Conference. The articles in the box were heavily paraffined, wrapped in paper, and paraffined again to protect against dampness. The lid of the box was heavily soldered and made watertight. President Smith made brief remarks and spoke of his hope that the time would never arise when the box and its contents would be disturbed. But should the contents ever be brought to light, they would establish the faith and belief of the church. In addition to nearly weekly updates in the Saints Herald and regular reports in the Autumn Leaves, stereopticon lantern slides showing the construction work on the auditorium and an accompanying presentation were sent around to congregations for church members to see the progress and encourage them to donate to complete the auditorium fund. The excitement continued into the fall of 1926, with the Saints Herald reporting the arrival on September 24th of reinforcing steel had made quite possible that the assembly room in the lower auditorium could be completed for use by the General Conference in 1927. The first General Conference in the auditorium did meet partly in the partly completed basement in 1927. Smith commented, "The accommodations will not, of course, be what they will when the basement is finished, but at that they will likely be much better than those of a tent." As the conference opened, there was no glass place to enclose the building. The doors were just rough boards salvaged from the construction work. The large openings were closed with nothing but canvas. The heating plant was made up of 4 furnaces placed in 4 widely separated corners of the room, a box of soft coal in close proximity to each furnace. The tables were rough boards covered with plasterboard, and the rough cement floor was covered with wooden shavings from the planing mill. But the saints who wished to get together in one room at that general conference were all there. The enthusiasm to finish the building led to a vote and subsequent approval of funds for what they hoped would be sufficient to complete the building by 1930. Here we see folks meeting on the slab for Easter in 1927, and they would have met below the slab for the conference in what is now the lower assembly room area. By September 1928, general officers and department offices were relocated to the auditorium. With the move, the auditorium officially became the headquarters for the church, and employees would continue to work amidst the construction of the building until the early 1960s. At the October 1928 General Conference, the church was able to meet in the conference chamber for the first time. However, the building still was not quite enclosed. Albert A. Smith, a member of the First Presidency, noted during the First Communion service that 12 sparrows had come, nibbling at the communion bread before being brushed away. The Laurel Club, a women's organization, moved into its basement kitchen in the fall of 1928 and served its first meal November 1st to more than 550 people. The Laurels were crucial to the auditorium's success. They raised much needed funds for building projects in the auditorium and other church buildings by selling cookbooks and meals. Perhaps most importantly, they fed conference attendees quickly. At the 1930 conference, they prepared and served about 3,000 meals a day, donating the proceeds to the church for needed projects. This next image is from May of 1929 with the caption, "May 8, 1929, it is partially completed to this date." Registration numbers for the Centennial Conference of 1930 exceeded 6,000 people. For the Sunday service, more than 186 priesthood members served communion to more than 12,000 people. Evangelist John T. Gresty of Sydney, Australia, had been contracted to compose a grand oratorio, The Course of Time, in the style of the Messiah, to be performed at the conference. A centennial pageant was performed titled Fulfillment by Alice Chase Burgess and directed by Gladys Newton Six. In three parts, the storyline portrayed the purpose of the church as the achievement and fulfillment of Christ's message in Christian living. Despite the celebratory tone of the conference, the financial uncertainty rippling throughout the world caused the General Conference to decide that no further constructive expenditures should be made until the general fund has been reimbursed. Work on the auditorium was stopped by early 1931. During the war years of the 1940s, a room was set aside in the auditorium as a place to stage relief supplies for families in need in Europe. Most of the project's volunteers were women who donated their time each week to organize and wrap packages of food and clothing, which were sent regularly to more than 100 families, with over 100,000 pounds of total supplies sent. Over 8,000 people registered for the 1940 conference, a record since the 1930 conference. By January 1943, church debt was retired that it had carried through the Depression, and plans to complete and furnish the auditorium could again be considered. The presiding bishopric led several fundraising initiatives to complete the building over the next 20 years. Rooms and entrances in the building were divided into smaller projects, and as each financial goal was met, that room or entrance could be completed. Over $400,000 was raised to complete the north entrance and lobby alone. President Harry S. Truman, a native of Independence, returned to his hometown for the first time as President of the United States on June 27, 1945. Over 10,000 people packed the auditorium conference chamber to welcome him. The Independence Examiner noted in an article titled, "At Last, Truman Fills the Auditorium," in the environs of the auditorium, over a distance of half a mile in every direction, every available parking space was occupied, and vacant lots were also filled with parked cars. There had never before been so many parked motor cars in Independence for any occasion. Truman said in part, "Yesterday I had to face the delegates of 50 nations who had met in San Francisco to prepare a charter for world peace, a terrible ordeal. All these things I am telling you about, and now I have to face and thank the people at home who are expecting impossible things of me. I shall attempt, as I have attempted in these other crises, to meet your expectations, but don't expect too much of me. I must have your help and support. There are two things I must accomplish as President of the United States. The first one is to win the war in Japan, and we are winning it. The next one is to win a peace. The first step towards winning of that peace has been accomplished at San Francisco, and I have another ordeal to face in the meeting of the so-called Big Three sometime next month, in which we shall discuss the preliminaries for a final peace treaty, which we hope will maintain the peace of the world for generations to come. We can't afford to have spilled this blood and tears and sweat, all the young men who are the cream of our population, the cream of the population of Russia and Great Britain and all our other allies. We mustn't under any circumstances allow that expenditure of lives and treasure to have been made in vain." He goes on to say, "Time and again, I have tried to fill this great auditorium, and this is the first time I have succeeded. I can't possibly tell you how much I appreciate this demonstration. I'm going to spend the next 2 or 3 days in Jackson County trying my best with all the handicaps of the presidency of the United States to enjoy myself with you as I formerly did when a judge of the county court. I want to say to you that I would give anything in the world if I could shake hands with every one of you individually and say to you what I say ordinarily. But you understand I'm not made of cast iron. I just simply can't do it. I hope you will appreciate, however, that I am now shaking hands with every one of you." And the president then raised both hands and clasped them together over his head. In 1956, the now beloved Auditorium organ was ordered from the Aeolian Skinner Organ Company, with the first components delivered in the spring of 1959. The organ was designed for concert recitals, oratorio accompaniment, and congregational singing. The 110 rank organ, later upgraded to 113, with 6,298 pipes, now 6,334, 94 stops, 2 consoles, was completed in the fall of 1959. Its first concert was November 6th, and installation cost over $115,000. The Amboy Centennial General Conference took place in 1960, with the highlight being the dedication of the auditorium organ on April 7th. Former presiding bishop G. Leslie DeLapp wrote in 1961, "The completion of the auditorium by the next General Conference has the promise of being the most heartwarming experience of my life." Bishop DeLapp's first impression of the auditorium came in 1927 at that Easter morning meeting on the slab, now the conference chamber floor, and the business session that took place below the slab, in which is now the lower assembly room. He was genuinely concerned at that conference that the financial position of the church didn't justify a project of this magnitude. The request to take a loan of $300,000 with the auditorium land as collateral had been approved at the 1927 conference. He said, "It seems paradoxical that following the remarkable conference of 1930, the church and the rest of the world had to make tremendous adjustments to survive the worst economic depression in the history of our country." In the 20s, the church had accumulated obligations beyond its ability to carry. A total debt of over 1.8 million forced the postponement indefinitely of any further work on the auditorium. He said, "In the 1930s, the auditorium appeared to some as a great white elephant. To others, such as Henry C. Smith, that architectural genius who designed and was primarily responsible for its marvelous beauty, and President Frederick M. Smith, who envisioned it in its completion and its eventual service to the church and community, it was essential." Bonds had been issued in a total amount of $335,000 at the time. But in addition to the mortgage indenture supporting these bonds, there was another one which pledged as collateral all properties of the church. During the Depression, a church member who had loaned the church a large sum of money came to the bishoprics office asking for a few dollars. He was kind and sympathetic, but he didn't have enough money in his house to buy groceries. DeLapp asked if it would help if he could arrange for $50 the next day. He said he would appreciate it very much and was very apologetic for imposing any additional burden upon the church. DeLapp turned over to him the first $50 available, and he was eventually paid off in full. He was representative of the many wonderful church members to whom the church was indebted. Bishop DeLapp, who had served under 3 church presidents during the construction of the auditorium, said, "The auditorium in those days was bleak and unfinished. Nevertheless, I could see the beauty in the design. My office was on the 5th floor southwest corner. Occasionally, when the pressure got too heavy, I would step into the main auditorium at the top of the balcony and envisage its beauty as I looked up towards the dome. I found myself impressed with the symmetry of the ribs pointing towards the apex of the ceiling, with the sunlight throwing its beams upon the walls. The lights and shadows enhanced its grace and majesty. In such periods of meditation, I gained something of the strength embodied in the building." He went on to say, Many activities have been carried out in the building in its unfinished state. The Harvest Home festivals called for the cooperation of hundreds of people and brought to Independence shipments of produce and other products from many places. These proved to be the most helpful in providing for those in need, as well as furthering educational and community progress. DeLapp also said the lower auditorium proved to be valuable in providing recreational facilities, which made it possible to carry on a program for the youth. The auditorium represented a challenge to our people to the payment of debt. It also served as a symbol of the ensign of Zion. DeLapp remembered that President F.M. Smith at one conference was seen carrying lunch trays to Bishops DeLapp and Curry because they had not had time to wait in the line, despite the fact that President Smith was likely irked with them over needing to institute strict financial policies. In a letter from 1960, Gordon Mesley, assistant to the first presidency, wrote to a Mrs. Olwine at the Star paper. Since coming to Independence a little over a year ago, I have been struck with the curious paradox of people's awareness coupled with the lack of knowledge about the auditorium here in Independence. Many people seem to know where the building is and seem to be aware of its connection with the church, but relatively few people, other than church members, have any clear understanding of the function of the building or the many diverse activities that take place here. Because of its size and location, the building is a prominent landmark in the Kansas City area. Because of the community, civic, and service club functions that are held here, the auditorium is becoming known to an increasingly larger number of people. Would the Star be interested in doing a feature article centering on what happens inside the auditorium? Such an article might include, but certainly would not be limited to, the following: the multiple uses of the conference chamber, such as high school commencements, community music association programs, political meetings such as the Harry Truman birthday party, which was televised here, organ recitals, or perhaps the dinners and banquets held in the Laurel Club dining room, such as the Knife and Fork Club meeting, the Chamber of Commerce dinners. The interest that specialized groups find in the building, such as the gleam in the eyes of a prospective bride as she sees the new auditorium chapel, the architects who are astonished and delighted with the harmony of the design and color, the engineers who marvel that such a building could be built the way it was at the end of the 20s, the musicians who come to stand by the organ and talk about such things as reverberation, then delay, time, and echo, the human interest and amusing things that happen in the building, such as people getting lost on the mile of corridors and ramps, the former night watchman who used to make his rounds on a bicycle with a flashlight, scaring the daylights out of people who were working late in the building, the lost electrical plans, which necessitated the almost complete rewiring of the building, the supposedly private conversation that was overheard 250 feet away because of the open structure of the ramps. Surely this type of article would be of great interest to the residents of the Kansas City area. Now, I'm not sure that that article was ever written. I couldn't find anything else in the folder along with it. But I did find a couple of interesting news clippings. And here is a picture of the auditorium. And you can see the guide service hours faintly there. The first article I found about guide service featured local druggist Earl Denton of Denton Drugs, and he was located actually on the square in Independence, and he volunteered one day a week as a guide. And Earl said, "I thought being a guide might do something for me personally. Standing before a group, whether 2 or 200, might give me more self-assurance and confidence." Earl was among those who answered the first presidency's call to volunteer because at the time, the auditorium was seeing about 28,000 people visit each year for tours. Young adults were also encouraged to guide, including Miss Barbara Draves, who as a high school student spent the summer giving tours at the auditorium in 1959. Originally, the cost of constructing the auditorium was anticipated to be under $1 million. By 1960, the last contract to complete the building had been bid, and the final cost of the building totaled around $4.5 million. The dedication of the early and mid 20th century members who endured wars and immense financial hardship finally came to fruition. The auditorium was dedicated April 1st, 1962. Thousands of church members, 3 church presidents, hundreds of church officers, staff, and construction teams worked and donated funds for the building over the course of 42 years. Bishop DeLapp said, "I can't help but wishing that some of our experiences could be made known to all church members today, for some have never experienced a depression." The people responded, women's groups, children's groups, members of the church, to the challenge to pay the debt and move forward with auditorium construction. Like Frederick M. Smith and Israel A. Smith, many didn't live to see the auditorium completed, but their legacy was remembered at the dedication. And here are some excerpts from F. Henry Edwards' dedicatory prayer. "We rejoice that in thy wisdom and thy love thou hast joined all generations together, so that those who have gone on before find fulfillment in those who come after them. And these in turn enjoy the fruits of past ministries and look forward to their own fulfillment in the lives of those whose days of opportunity are yet to be. The auditorium has been built to thy glory and for the use of the World Church and the stakes and the center stake as a place of worship, education, and fellowship, and of legislative assembly. Here are housed the general offices of the church and the records. Here the major councils of the church meet, and from this place the word of counsel and the word of direction go forth to enlighten and unify. The auditorium has also been erected that it might be of value to people of the community. It is offered to this end, with the prayer that those responsible shall be readily perceptive of the ways in which such ministries of those of music and drama and such opportunities for fellowship as achieved in the breaking of bread together may make for a community of understanding and high unity and soundness of purpose." In the 64 years since that dedication, the church has continued to invest in the auditorium's future. In the 1970s, cast concrete panels were added to the east, west, and south exterior walls, and lights were added to the roof by 1980. In this clipping, you can see in the lower right, the architect George Lund demonstrating one of the lights. In the 1990s, the rostrum was remodeled and a wooden floor was installed. Perhaps the most welcome improvements came at the west entrance, where new restrooms, a new elevator, and a lobby transformed the building. In 2025, work began to re-secure the concrete slabs to the building's exterior, and brick walls were repointed on the north and east sides. This year, a new roof over the west entrance is in progress, and new HVAC and sound systems were recently installed. When I posted about the centennial of the groundbreaking on the church's and foundation's social media, many of you wrote in with your own experiences or reminiscences of family at the auditorium. This slide shows 2 of Fredham's great-great-granddaughters sliding on the ramps for the first time. I'm pretty sure he never envisioned his descendants doing that. Next, we have some comments from Facebook, and I'll read a few of them to you. Norma Elgin wrote, "As a child growing up in Council Bluffs, Iowa, I remember saving money to buy 1 chair for the auditorium. If my memory serves me correctly, we each had a small box in which to deposit our coins. Such good memories of the first time I entered the chamber and the overwhelming spirit that flowed through me." Jamie Montgomery Mayman wrote, our little group studied about its history. The first conference held there was actually in the basement on the cement floor with the shell of the roof above. Wood-burning stoves were spaced around for warmth. Susan Apperson said, "My father, Donner Dowker, played this in the sand at the construction site as a child. And my grandfather, John Dowker, was a missionary before the Depression when many were released. I grew up running up and down those ramps as a child. We were there frequently with the majority of my father's family living there." Diana Jones wrote in part, "As a little girl, I drew a chalk image of the auditorium on a large blackboard we had in our garage. My great-grandfather, Gomer Wells, started the guide service there. When attending many services there, I would look up and try to count all the lights in the ceiling and would always lose count." Karen Hacker said, "Me, my brother John, and my sister Kristen also grew up running up and down the ramps, against the wishes and warnings of all the grown-ups." Joseph Bagley wrote, "Growing up in New Jersey, I had no idea of the vastness of this building. Moving to Kansas City, my high school graduation, Northeast High School, was at the auditorium. My dad recounted the challenges of the construction and the leadership of presiding Bishop Leslie DeLapp, which was instrumental during the mid-20th century for the church and this building." Roger Revel said, "One of my favorite buildings in the world. I was fortunate to have an office there for 13 years on level 3 facing south. I've previously noted that my maternal grandmother contributed money towards chairs for each of her grandchildren." And Jenny Fink wrote, "I remember as a little girl, about 2 or 3 years old, playing on the dark ramps while my mother played basketball." That would have been in the early 1950s. In addition to world conferences and international leader gatherings, the building welcomes church and community events throughout the year, including recitals and graduations. The presiding bishopric is seeking partnerships to increase the auditorium's use, benefiting both Community of Christ and the community. The First Presidency shared at World Conference 2025 a commitment, first, to maintaining the temple, and second, the auditorium, provided that the financial support of the church remains sufficient for operating the structures and that they continue to serve as productive tools of mission. The challenge in the coming months and years is not unlike that of the mid-20th century church, which was challenged financially, yet was able to move the building forward, at times brick by brick. Members recognize that building community in Christ sometimes comes with significant setbacks, but is also marked with major leaps forward, brought only through individual and communal sacrifice and dedication. President Cram challenged the church at the 2025 World Conference that we are part of something sacred and still unfolding. Hope is not something we stumble upon. Hope is something we choose. And our collective story reminds us it is in especially the hardest times that choosing hope becomes an act of faith, an act of courage. The church members whose contributions made the auditorium possible lived through some of the most challenging times in recent history and had the courage to act out in faith. May we be inspired to act by their example. At the General Conference in 1919, President Smith addressed the church on the current state of the world. In an effort to encourage the church while looking back at what they had endured, he said, "The work of the church is onward. The progress of the past few years has been encouraging. Before us lies a great field of opportunity. Are we ready? Have we the courage to approach our ideals? Shall we remain below them?" These questions are still relevant today. Our response will shape the auditorium's future ministries and its ability to bless the church and local community in the future. Thank you.
No, thank you, Kristen. Oh my gosh, there was so much more to the story of the auditorium than I realized, and you seem to have covered it all. Makes me wonder what is left of the auditorium history. Thank you so much for unlocking all of the tales behind this treasured historic dome. And I'm sorry to say that it's time to draw our time together to a close. So, again, thank you, Christin, for making our final lecture well worth the wait. Also, thank you to Peter and Wendy for showing up each week and giving a hand behind the scenes. And lastly, many, many, many thanks to our church history friends in the audience for joining us tonight, for your continuing support of the internship fundraising campaign this year. Again, now's your chance to double that donation. We are so very grateful for your continuing interest in church history, friends, and your love of a good story. We couldn't host programs like tonight without your support, so thank you so much. We will be back in November hosting another series of church history lectures. We hope you will join us then. So until next time, keep reading your church history and take care, friends.